All right, what we are doing here in these notes should look familiar. It should not be anything new that you haven't seen before. The only difference in what we are doing here is that here is the postulate we were using for corresponding angles. If we have the parallel lines, then the corresponding angles are congruent. The only difference is that we're going to use the converse. And remember, the converse of a statement takes the statement and switches it around. So instead of saying if we have parallel lines, then corresponding angles are congruent, it's going to switch and say if corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. That is the corresponding angles converse. So if the corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. And so these are going to use all the same angles that we've been talking about. Except now, instead of saying, here's some parallel lines, what kind of angles do we have? We're going to say, here's the kind of angles we have. Here's the angles that should be true. Therefore, the lines are parallel. So see if you can predict what the rest of these are going to say before I show them. Next one is alternate interior angles. And so alternate interior angles are supposed to be congruent. So it's going to read, if the alternate interior angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. And then our next one is going to talk about alternate exterior angles. So the alternate exterior angles converse is going to say if the alternate exterior angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So we're using the angles and we're saying what should be true about those kind of angles, and that will lead us to the lines being parallel. That's what you're going to see here today. And so the last one, be careful here because this is consecutive interior. And as we talked about, consecutive interior are going to be supplementary, not congruent. So if I see those consecutive interior or same side interior angles and they're supplementary, that will mean the lines are parallel. So as we go through these examples, you want to think ahead and say, what kind of angles do we have? What is supposed to be true about them? That's the mantra that should be going through your head. That's the question I'm going to ask on every problem here. So let's take a look at some examples. We are determining if the lines are parallel. We're going to determine if the lines are parallel. And we're going to do that by saying, what kind of angles do we have? What should be true about them? So we're going to start with our first one. What kind of angles do we have? Well, inside or outside? Well, those are outside of lines A and B, and then on different sides. So those are alternate exterior angles. And again, we want to think about what should be true about alternate exterior angles. The alternate exterior angles should be congruent, and they are, because they have the tick marks on them. Therefore, the lines are parallel. So we are good to go. Next one, again, think about what kind of angles do we have? What's supposed to be true about them? There's my zigzag shape. Inside, angle 1 is above my transversal, angle 2 is below my transversal. So those are alternate interior angles. And if we look up there, it says the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is 180. That's telling me that the angles are supplementary. So we need to ask ourselves, are alternate interior angles supposed to be supplementary? No, they're not. They're supposed to be congruent. They should be congruent, not supplementary. So the lines are not parallel this time. What kind of angles? What's supposed to be true about them? And that will feed you what you should set up on each of these. So let's keep going. Pause for 1 minute and see if you can pick out on each of these what kind of angles we have and what's supposed to be true. We'll start with these. There's my zigzag pattern. So these angles are alternate interior. And we know alternate interior angles are supposed to be congruent. 60 and 25 here is 85. So we're good to go. Those are congruent like they're supposed to be. Now let's take a look at our next one. First off, 82 and 40 here should be 122. And these angles, top right with top right, or making my F shape, these two angles are corresponding angles. And we know that corresponding angles are supposed to be congruent, but they aren't. Not parallel. So there is how the explanation should look. In the first one, the alternate interior angles are indeed congruent, so the lines will be parallel. Over here, our corresponding angles are supposed to be congruent, but they aren't. So the lines are not parallel. What kind of angles do we have? What is supposed to be true about them? And now we're going to use these to build the same equations that we built last time. The only difference you're going to see is that we're going to use the word converse, because remember, these are the switched around statements that are being used to prove whether the lines are parallel or not. So in my explanations of what kind of angles, you're going to see that word converse come up. And again, try and work ahead of me here and see if you can come up with the equations and come up with the solving process before I show it. And then use my answers to check your work to see if you're doing it right. What kind of angles? What should be true about them? And that'll give you your equation. On the first one, what kind of angles? Well, I'll trace them out. Here's my F shape, or matching spots. In the top group, it's in the top left. In the bottom group, it's in the top left. Matching spots. So those are corresponding angles. And I know that corresponding angles are supposed to be congruent. So since they're supposed to be congruent, I'm going to make them equal. Set them equal to each other. So here's my two measurements. They're supposed to be equal, so I'm going to make them equal to each other. And then I'm going to solve down, get everything with x on the same side, subtract and divide, and I get 5 for x. On your next one, again, we're going to first start by asking what kind of angles we have. Inside those lines, one's on the left of my transversal, one's on the right of my transversal. So those are alternate interior, and alternate interior angles are supposed to be, again, congruent. So we're going to make them equal to each other. And once again, I'm going to solve from there, and I'm going to get 22. Last one. You may recognize this problem from the notes from last time. And it's going to involve, I want to use this to emphasize that this is exactly the same idea as we've been talking about. We're still going to say these are both inside the lines, and they're both on the same side of the transversal, so they are same side interior angles. And we know that those kind of angles, same side interior angles, are supposed to be supplementary. So again, that's going to feed me my equation. If I know they're supposed to be supplementary, that means that I should add them to be 180. So I'm going to take my first angle, the x plus 20, add it to my other angle, x, to get 180. And that's the same equation I had set up the last time, and I get the same answer of 80 that I did last time. The only difference is that last time I knew they were parallel, and I was using that to talk about the angles. Now I'm using the angles to talk about them being parallel, the converse of the statement. So those are my ideas. The homework following up on this is going to be a few of these equations for you to practice. Again, it's what kind of angles do we have, and what is supposed to be true about those kind of angles. That's what you should work on and be practicing.